We're moving in a different direction, Michael Whitman, CEO of Quantum Dynamics, said from the head of the conference table. After careful consideration, the board has decided to restructure senior leadership. My name is James Harrison, age 52, and for 20 years I'd served as Chief Operations Officer of Quantum Dynamics. I joined when we were just 8 people in a rented office space, building industrial control systems for local manufacturers. Now, we employ over 400 people across 3 states, with contracts worth millions. I looked around the boardroom at the faces I'd known for years. None met my eyes except Alex Whitman, Michael's 26-year-old son, who sat with barely concealed satisfaction. Fresh MBA from Stanford, 2 years' experience at a consulting firm, and now apparently my replacement. Your severance package is generous, Sandra from HR added, sliding a folder across the polished table. 6 months' salary, plus accrued benefits. I opened the folder and noted the effective date, immediate. 20 years ended with a 3-paragraph letter and a check. Of course, we'd appreciate your help with the transition, Michael continued. Alex will need some guidance understanding our operational systems. I closed the folder carefully. I understand completely, I said, my voice steady. When would you like me to clean out my office? Michael looked relieved at my calm response. Take the rest of the week. No rush. I stood, straightened my tie, and walked to the door. Then I turned back. One question. Who's handling the Meridian audit next month? Alex spoke up eagerly. I'll be taking point on that. Already reviewed the preliminary documents. I nodded. Interesting. Good luck with that. I left before they could see the slight smile forming on my face. The thing about building a company from the ground up is that you know where all the bodies are buried. Not literal bodies, of course, but the kind of secrets that keep CEOs awake at night. The kind that live in archived emails, buried in contract appendices, hidden in audit trails that nobody bothers to check anymore. I'd started at Quantum when Michael was still trying to convince local banks to give us operating loans. I'd mortgaged my house to help make payroll during the lean years. I'd worked 18-hour days setting up manufacturing processes, training staff, building relationships with suppliers and clients. But more importantly, I'd documented everything. Back in my office, I began systematically packing my personal items. Family photos, engineering awards, the small cactus that had somehow survived 15 years under fluorescent lighting. Jenny from accounting stopped by, her face tight with concern. I just heard. This is ridiculous. You built half our production systems yourself. I shrugged. Companies change. People move on. But Alex Whitman, he doesn't know the first thing about operations. I'm sure he'll figure it out, I said, carefully wrapping a coffee mug my daughter had made in high school. She was graduating medical school next month. The celebration dinner would be easier to afford with 6 months' severance. What Michael and the board had forgotten, or maybe never knew, was that our biggest client, Meridian Technologies, had a very specific clause in their contract. One I'd insisted on when we signed the deal 5 years ago. Any change in senior operations leadership required their explicit approval during the contract term. I'd added that clause after watching too many competitors implode when inexperienced management took over. Meridian represented 40% of our annual revenue. They weren't going to be happy learning about this change 3 weeks before their annual audit. That evening, I sat in my home office reviewing files I'd kept on my personal drive. Not company documents. I was too careful for that. Just notes, dates, copies of publicly available records. The kind of information that becomes valuable only when you know where to look and what it means. My phone buzzed. A text from Tom Chen, Meridian's Chief Technical Officer. Heard rumors about changes at Quantum. Everything okay? I didn't respond immediately. Tom and I had worked together for 8 years, built a relationship based on trust and competence. He'd been the one to suggest the leadership approval clause. At 9 p.m., Michael called. I let it go to voicemail. James, let's discuss this transition over breakfast tomorrow. Just us, like old times. Old times. Like when he promised me equity in the company, then restructured the shares so his family trust held controlling interest. Or when he'd taken credit for the manufacturing automation system I'd designed, telling investors it was his vision. I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I arrived early for my exit interview with HR. Sandra looked uncomfortable as she went through the standard questions. Previous role, reasons for departure, suggestions for improvement. One last thing, I said, pulling out a folder of my own. I need to document some concerns about regulatory compliance. Sandra's pen paused above her notepad. Compliance? I placed 3 documents on her desk. The first is the Meridian Technologies contract, specifically Section 7.3 regarding leadership changes. The second is an internal audit from last year, highlighting discrepancies in our quality control reporting. The third is a series of emails discussing how those discrepancies were handled. The color drained from Sandra's face as she read. These emails, they're about falsifying test results. Not falsifying, I corrected. Modifying testing parameters to achieve desired outcomes. Alex's suggestion, actually, part of his process improvement initiatives last year. Why are you showing me this? Because it's your job to document potential compliance issues, and because in exactly 3 weeks, Meridian's auditors will be here reviewing everything, including our test documentation. Sandra stood quickly. I need to speak with Michael. Of course, I said. I believe the board is meeting this morning to finalize my replacement. Might want to catch them before they make anything official. I spent the next hour clearing out my office, while various executives rushed past my door. Raised voices came from the conference room. Twice I saw Alex storm past, his face flushed with anger. At 11:30, Michael appeared in my doorway. He looked older than he had yesterday. The leadership change, he said carefully, we may need to reconsider the timing. I continued packing my books. That's not my concern anymore. James, be reasonable. You know how important the Meridian contract is. We can discuss a new arrangement. I turned to face him. Like the equity arrangement we discussed 10 years ago. Or the retirement package you promised before giving it to your brother-in-law instead. Michael had the grace to look embarrassed. Things were complicated then, but we can make this right. Can we? Because from where I'm standing, you were willing to throw away 20 years of loyalty to give your son a promotion he didn't earn. And in the process, you put our biggest contract at risk. Alex has potential. He just needs mentoring. Then mentor him. But not in my job, and not when it threatens everything we've built. Michael ran a hand through his gray hair. What do you want? I sat down at my desk, still my desk, for the moment, and pulled out a document I'd prepared the night before. Full equity partnership, backdated to when you first promised it. A seat on the board. And Alex works under me for 2 years, learning operations the right way, before we even consider a transition. That's extreme. No, Michael. Extreme was trying to push me out 3 weeks before a major client audit. Extreme was thinking you could replace 2 decades of experience with an MBA and a famous last name. He stared at the document for a long moment. The board won't like this. The board won't like losing Meridian's business either. Their choice. 2 hours later, I sat in a hastily called board meeting, watching Michael explain the new arrangement. Alex slouched in his chair, no longer looking quite so satisfied. Sandra from HR kept glancing at the compliance documents sitting in a folder in front of her. This is blackmail. Richard from the board sputtered. This is business, I corrected. Something about moving in a different direction. I believe you called it. By 5 p.m., the papers were signed. I had my equity, my board seat, and my job. Alex would start his operational training next week, beginning with quality control procedures. As I drove home that evening, I thought about choices and consequences. Michael had chosen family over loyalty, ambition over experience. He'd forgotten that business is built on more than just profits and procedures. It's built on trust, on relationships, on knowing not just how things work, but why they work that way. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom at Meridian. "Heard things got interesting today. Glad it worked out." I smiled. Sometimes the best power is the power you never have to use. Sometimes just knowing where the bodies are buried is enough. That night, I sat on my back deck with a glass of bourbon, watching the sunset. 20 years of hard work had finally paid off. Not in the way I'd expected, but maybe in the way it needed to. Tomorrow, I'd start teaching Alex everything I knew about running operations. Really teaching him, not just the surface-level understanding he'd gotten in business school, but the deep knowledge that only comes from building something from nothing. And maybe, just maybe, he'd learn the most important lesson of all. That true leadership isn't about titles or family names. It's about earning trust, building relationships, and remembering that every decision has consequences. The bourbon tasted better than usual. The first month after my almost termination brought changes nobody had expected. I'd arrived at work early Monday morning to find Alex Whitman already waiting in my office, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something closer to apprehension. "I've reviewed the quality control protocols," he said, holding up a thick binder. There seemed to be some inconsistencies with what I implemented last year. Inconsistencies, I repeated, setting down my coffee. That's one way to put it. The past week had been interesting. News of the attempted leadership change and sudden reversal had spread through the company like wildfire. People who'd avoided eye contact during my brief period of disgrace now stopped by regularly, sharing information they thought I should know. Amazing what nearly losing your job can do for office intelligence gathering. "Look," Alex said, "I know we got off on the wrong foot. Dad, I mean Michael, explained some things about the company's history. About your role in building everything." I gestured for him to sit. "Let's talk about those quality control modifications you suggested last year. Walk me through your reasoning." For the next 2 hours, I listened as Alex explained his process improvements. On paper, they looked good. Streamlined testing procedures, reduced documentation requirements, faster turnaround times. The kind of changes that would impress someone looking at spreadsheets rather than actual manufacturing operations. "Your suggestions would have saved us about $400,000 annually," I said when he finished. He brightened. "Exactly. The efficiency gains. And cost us the Meridian contract when their audit revealed we'd compromised testing integrity. Probably other contracts too, once word got out. How much revenue would that have cost us?" The color drained from his face. I didn't think it through. "No, you didn't. Because you were looking at numbers without understanding the relationships behind them. Without knowing why we do things the way we do." Over the next few weeks, I put Alex through what I called Operations Boot Camp. Every morning at 6 a.m., we walked the production floor, talking to shift supervisors, observing processes, understanding the human element behind our manufacturing systems. He was smart. I had to give him that. Once he got past his initial resistance, his questions showed genuine insight. He started seeing patterns in our operations that even some veteran managers missed. One morning, about 3 weeks in, he stopped at the testing station for our main product line. "These calibration procedures," he said, "they're different from the industry standard. More rigorous." I nodded. "Notice anything else?" He studied the documentation. "They're redundant. We test the same parameters twice, but under different conditions." "Why do you think that is?" He thought for a moment. "Because if there's a flaw, it might only show up under specific circumstances. The redundancy isn't inefficiency, it's protection." Now you're getting it. The Meridian audit was approaching, and contrary to what everyone expected, I put Alex in charge of preparation. Not because I trusted him completely, but because he needed to understand the stakes. Every number in these reports, I told him, represents someone's job. Every quality metric affects someone's life. That's what you missed last year with your improvements. He spent 3 days reviewing every document, every test result, every process modification. On the 4th day, he came to my office looking troubled. I found something, he said, placing a folder on my desk. Those changes I implemented last year, they didn't just affect test results. They created a gap in our compliance documentation. If Meridian's auditors dig deep enough. I opened the folder. The gap was significant, not catastrophic, but enough to raise serious questions. What do you suggest we do about it? He looked surprised. You're asking me. You found the problem. Let's see if you can find the solution. Alex spent the next week working with our quality control team, reconstructing documentation and implementing new verification procedures. He worked longer hours than anyone, double-checking everything personally. The night before the Meridian audit, I found him still at his desk at 9 p.m. You know, I said, leaning against his doorframe, 6 weeks ago, you thought this job was beneath you. He looked up, exhausted but focused. I was wrong about a lot of things. Your father was too, once. Want to hear that story? Alex pushed back from his desk. Does it involve how you saved the company? Actually, it's about how your father saved it, and why I stayed loyal to him for so long. I sat down and told him about the early days, when Quantum was struggling to survive. About the time Michael Whitman had mortgaged his house to make payroll, not just for the executives, but for every employee. How he'd worked 30 straight hours during our first major production crisis, refusing to go home until every worker's job was secure. That's the Michael Whitman I followed for 20 years, I said. The one who understood that business isn't just about profit margins and efficiency metrics. What changed him? Success, maybe. Distance from day-to-day operations. It's easy to forget what matters when you're looking at everything through quarterly reports and board presentations. The Meridian audit went better than anyone expected. Tom Chen spent 6 hours reviewing our documentation, paying special attention to the areas Alex had fixed. Impressive recovery, he said during our closing meeting. Those new verification procedures are actually better than our standard requirements. Alex tried to hide his relief, but I caught his slight smile. After the auditors left, Michael called us both to his office. He looked uncomfortable, something I hadn't seen in years. Tom Chen called me personally, he said. Praised our operational controls. Said we're setting new industry standards. He paused. He also mentioned that Alex's improvements to the verification system showed real promise. Alex straightened in his chair. It was mostly fixing my own mistakes. No, I interrupted. It was learning from them. There's a difference. Michael studied his son for a moment, then turned to me. I owe you both an apology. Alex, for pushing you into a role you weren't ready for. And James, for forgetting what made this company work in the first place. Water under the bridge, I said, though we all knew it wasn't quite that simple. That evening, as I was leaving, Alex caught up with me in the parking lot. I've been thinking about those early days you mentioned, he said. About how Dad used to be. I found some old files, project reports from when you first started here. Oh. The manufacturing automation system you designed, Dad didn't just take credit for it, did he? He actually tried to give you the credit, but the investors wanted to hear it from the CEO. I smiled slightly. Your father was different then. He understood the value of his people. Help me understand something, Alex said. You could have left years ago, started your own company, probably made more money. Why'd you stay? I looked at the building where I'd spent 20 years of my life. The lights were still on in several offices, people working late to keep everything running smoothly. Because sometimes it's not about who gets the credit, I said. Sometimes it's about building something that matters, something that provides for all these families, something that lasts. Alex nodded slowly. I think I'm starting to understand that. As I drove home, I thought about the changes the past month had brought, not just in Alex or in the company's operations, but in the way people viewed leadership. The attempted firing and my return had sent a message. Experience and integrity still mattered. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Board dinner tomorrow. Your insights on the expansion plan would be appreciated. I smiled. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way, but sometimes, if you're lucky, they stick. The equity partnership papers sat on my desk at home, finally signed and legally binding. But somehow, they seemed less important now than they had a month ago. What mattered more was seeing Alex grow into a leader who understood the real value of operations, of people, of doing things right. Maybe that was the best revenge of all. Not just keeping my job, but making it mean something more than just a position and a paycheck. Making it about building something better than what was there before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new lessons to teach. But for tonight, I could sit back and appreciate how close we'd come to losing everything, and how sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes. The equity agreement could wait. 1 year after the day they tried to fire me, I stood at the podium during Quantum Dynamics' annual shareholder meeting. The room was packed. Our success with the Andersen deal had attracted attention throughout the industry. Not because we'd given in to their demands, but because we hadn't. Our counterproposal had become a case study in how mid-sized manufacturers could negotiate with industry giants. Andersen had ultimately accepted our terms, leading to a controlled expansion that maintained our quality standards while growing our capacity. Last year taught us something valuable. I began, looking out at the faces before me. It taught us that success isn't just about growth or profit margins. It's about knowing who you are as a company and staying true to those principles. In the front row, Michael and Alex sat side by side, both nodding slightly. They'd changed too over the past year. Michael had rediscovered his passion for the hands-on aspects of the business, often joining us on the production floor. Alex had earned the respect of every department, building relationships based on competence rather than his last name. Our revenue has doubled, I continued, but more importantly, our quality metrics have improved by 32%. Our employee retention rate is the highest in the industry, and our client satisfaction scores set new records quarter after quarter. The presentation concluded with our latest announcement, a training academy for manufacturing operations funded by our increased profits. Alex's idea, inspired by his own journey from theoretical knowledge to practical understanding. After the meeting, the three of us gathered in Michael's office. The view of the production floor below showed our new expansion in full swing, 2 additional manufacturing lines operating at peak efficiency. Hard to believe it's been a year, Michael said, pouring 3 glasses of scotch, since we almost made the biggest mistake in company history. Alex picked up his glass. You mean since you almost fired the person who saved us from making the biggest mistake in company history? I accepted my drink with a smile. Everything worked out the way it needed to. Because you were prepared, Alex said. You had the documentation, the client relationships, the knowledge they couldn't replace. Speaking of documentation, Michael added, sliding a folder across his desk. The board approved your proposal. Starting next quarter, you're taking on the role of executive chairman. I opened the folder. The position was new, created specifically to leverage my experience while giving me more time to focus on strategic initiatives and mentoring. And Alex, I asked, though I already knew the answer. Ready to step up as COO, Michael confirmed. Properly this time, with the full support of the board and our client partners. Alex raised his glass to lessons learned.